Okay, welcome everybody. It is another edition of Talking Away The Taboo. Tonight, we are really excited to be launching our series talking about surrogacy. It is one of the, I wouldn't say unknown things in the fertility world, but it is definitely something that people talk about not so much. And we are here tonight to talk to Elisheva Levitt. Elisheva, who I'm bringing on right now. Elisheva, doing surrogacy, let me say that actually differently. Elisheva was one of the first people that I know in the Jewish space who has done surrogacy. Here she is. Let me make sure. There we go.
Hi,
Here we go.
Aimee.
Um, so Elisheva is one of the first people I know in the Jewish world who did surrogacy, who talked about it openly. And she and I met each other actually during COVID. And then we got a chance to meet each other in person afterwards. But that COVID conversation was a conversation done by a member, organized by her shul. And it had different people talking about different fertility stories. And Elisheva's story was one of them. And so we became, I don't know, dare I say, friends after that?
Yeah,
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, so Elisheva, introduce yourself to everybody, and then we're going to launch right into your story.
sure. I'm Elisheva Levitt. Definitely not from here. But I've lived in America longer now than I lived in England at this point. I'm married to an amazing person named Aaron Levitt, and I have three incredible children, each of them a journey on its own. And my children's, I would just say before we dive into questions, my children's names are Shira, Rina, and Simcha, which all are words of different expressions of joy. And it really, they were chosen, obviously, in particular because what we went through was so tough, but ended up joyous. So that's really who I am. I'm a principal in a day school in Baltimore. Been in Jewish education for 20 plus years, more than I care to admit to. And I love working with kids, and I also love sharing our journey because we made a conscious decision years ago to be open about it, because even though it's tricky in the Orthodox community, but we decided that we wanted other couples to know that this is an option that follows halachic ruling, and if we didn't share it, then we won't help other people. And that was my therapy through getting through a lot of very difficult losses before we got to this point. So I'm glad that I've only been able in the last, I would say, 6 years or so, been able to share it without falling apart. Because thank God my kids are older and we sort of moved into the next stage of life, and I'm just glad I'm able to do it, to be honest.
You know, I remember actually when we were having that planning meeting for that discussion way back in 2020,
Yeah.
and I remember you, along with the others, like we were all getting emotional as we were sharing our story,
Yeah.
and so. It is. I'm so grateful to you. And by the way, yes, there is a comment from someone who just said, "Wow, I never knew it was halachically, meaning from Jewish law, that it was allowed." It is absolutely allowed. And so we're just gonna jump right in. So Elisheva, take us back. So you got married, and you just, I'm assuming you thought, "Hey, like we're just gonna start our family. It's gonna be
Easy
amazing
peasy.
and all good." And tell us the story.
I'll try and keep it brief. It's a long story, but I'll tell you the highlights. So we married very young. I was 19. My husband and I had been together for a couple of years, and we had our oldest daughter, Shira, a year after we were married. Thank God, all went pretty smoothly until I found out I was Rh negative, which is a pretty common issue. And since my husband's positive blooded, that's a very common issue. Again, that they basically give you medicine to prevent your blood system, your bloodstream building a resistance to the blood type inside of you as in your baby that is opposed to what your blood type is. I'm not explaining this so smoothly, but
It was
they gave.
perfect. It was
Okay.
perfect. You did a perfect job.
Okay, so they gave me the medicine exactly the right time they're supposed to. It was a shot of that 28 weeks and a shot after birth. Everything went pretty smoothly. It wasn't the easiest delivery, but fine. We were very thrilled. And then at my 6-week checkup, the doctor said, by the way, let's do a blood work because you're Rh negative. Let's just make sure. And for some reason, he saw in the blood work that my bloodstream had been sensitized, which means that I'd started building antibodies in my system that would basically affect any future pregnancies. He said, no big deal. We'll monitor it. Keep an eye. Next time you'll be more high risk, but that's okay. We've done this before. I was able to get pregnant a couple of years later. We were actually in Israel at the time, and came back to the States towards the end of the pregnancy. And I went to see a specialist because I wanted to make sure I was being watched in Israel. Everything was fine. And as the pregnancy was progressing, nothing major. Basically, the antibodies double. So it's 1 to 2, 1 to 4, 1 to 8, and double. Once it gets to 1 to 16, that's already starting to concern because those antibodies will attack the baby's blood and make the baby anemic. Only at 32 weeks, we were actually in sleepaway camp. We went home, had a sonogram, and they did not do blood work. They chose not to because I was so far along. Came back to camp and got called the next day, please come in. Your levels are 1 to 500, which is obviously a crazy jump. Yeah. At that moment, when I got the phone call, I knew something was up. I just had this horrible gut feeling. That whole night, I'm poking my belly the whole night, trying to get movement and response, nothing. And my husband's like, it's going to be fine. Don't worry. You know, what do we know about this? And unfortunately, sure enough, there was no heartbeat by the time we got back. So I immediately, what I wanted to do is have a C-section and just get it out of me because I was 22 and really didn't know what to do with any of this. And I had an 18-month-old who needed my attention, and the doctor's like, why would you want a scar of that for the rest of your life to remember by? So I went through, I think it was a day and a half to 2 days of labor, induced labor, all the while hearing women in the next room every 2 hours, congratulations, it's a boy, it's a girl, it's a boy. They did not have the sensitivity at the time. We're talking about 22 years ago to think that a woman like me should be in a separate area. They didn't, whatever. So
I was going to say that's a whole other podcast, which we need to do at some other point.
100%. And it happened to me again with my third loss. Same thing. I had a stillborn at 23 weeks, and same thing. I was stuck in the same ward with the same congratulatory, different hospital, same problem. So we went back. We found a specialist. I managed to find a doctor in. It's not true. We started looking into surrogacy at that point after that loss, like a couple of years later. And we spoke to a rabbi in Yeshiva University, Rabbi Willig, and he said, this is complicated. It's new, but let's see what happens. And we found an amazing religious doctor in New Jersey, who at the very beginning of teenage shuls, right, when email listservs were a thing, they put out a teenage shul ad saying, looking for a single Jewish woman, because that was what halachically was decided. We need to find a single Jewish woman to carry a baby for us. And for all sorts of reasons, nothing panned out. We went back to Rabbi Willig. He's like, listen, we were about to move to Florida. And he's like, don't rush. Go to Florida. I bet you'll meet some people who've had like some amazing doctor experiences. You'll find let's try one more time. Let's see if you can find the right thing. Go to Florida. Of course, we met a couple that has this miraculous baby. And I'm like, oh my God, it's exactly how the rabbi said it would happen. Miraculous baby. They connected me to their doctor in California. He did all sorts of blood work and said, yeah, no, it's not Rh disease. It's something else. Tried all sorts of things on me, medications. He said, let's try again. I said, okay, you sure, we're good? He's like, yeah, we're good to go. Sure enough, I become pregnant. I'm monitored both by him and at a distance, and my local doctor. It comes to 16 weeks, and my antibodies start going up. It's like 1 to 16, I think, at that point. I called Dr. So-and-so. He really was a so-and-so, to be honest. I called him and I say, what do I do? He's like, honestly, I really don't know. I said, no. I'm pregnant already. Like, remember, I got pregnant. I'm 16 weeks. He's like, I'm baffled. And he basically washed his hands of me because he just didn't know what to do to help me. So my perinatologist, who's not really in charge of this, but she did some research, made some phone calls. They tried me on IVIG. It didn't work in the long run. And unfortunately, I lost that baby. So that was my third loss. I'd had a miscarriage in between the two. At that point,
I'm going to stop you just for a second, because there's a comment here about a woman who just said, she's Rh negative. She's Rh negative. Her husband is Rh positive, and she said the story is terrifying me. I have 3 kids. Kanina heard that she has 3 kids. Thank God. I want to be very clear. Like there are so many things in medicine that we understand, and there are so many things in medicine that we do not understand. The ROGAM, the shot that is given to people who are Rh positive, or what we have. For those of you who don't know, I am a pediatrician by training, and so I do have a little bit of medical knowledge. And so the shot that is given when there is what's called Rh incompatibility, that shot ROGAM,
Right.
when it's given at the appropriate time. I'm not going to quote percentages here because that's not what we do here at I Was Supposed to Have a
Right.
Baby, but it usually works and
100%.
prevents there from being any future incompatibility, a story like this. However, go ahead, Elisheva.
Once in a
Yeah.
blue moon. I mean, I'll tell you, my sister's in the same position, and the ROGAM did work for her. So really, I was an anomaly. The doctor never really gave me answers why. I don't think he really could figure it out, but we sort of had to accept that. Anyway, after a 32-week stillborn, a 16-week miscarriage with a D&C, and a 23-week loss, after really exhausting all our options, we went back to the rabbi and said, all right, we did what you said. We exhausted all our options, and I was mentally in a very low place. I was having tons of anxiety. I was the height of my weight. Everything was wrong. And I had at the time, a 6-year-old who was desperate for siblings. And she couldn't understand. I remember when we lost the third one, we named the stillborns we gave them names. We felt they're very much a part of us. We were actually advised not to, but we decided to not listen. And that third one we named Amuna, to remind ourselves to have faith, because it means faith in English. And I remember we were sitting at the Shabbat table, and I was trying to make sure she was okay. And I say to her, Shira, I had a baby, but unfortunately the baby has gone to Hashem. And I said, actually, we gave the baby a name. So she said, oh, what did you name it? I said, Amuna. And she looks and she's like, Amuna? That's a weird name. And when she said it so matter-of-factly, having been a first grade teacher for many years, I'm like, all right, she'll be okay. She doesn't even remember the story when I asked her. She's 25 and she still doesn't remember it. But
Wow.
So, we have to remind ourselves, have faith. Something's going to work out. This wasn't the time. It happens to be that pregnancy was kind of crazy because I had in utero, an in utero infusion. The baby had a blood transfusion
Goodness.
in utero. I had a room full of people watching because it was quite something. The first one transfusion worked. The second one, unfortunately, did not. And the baby became hydropic, which means it had anemia and died ultimately. But we go back to him and we say, okay, now what? He's like, well, I guess surrogacy is the way. Now there's an institution in which I'm sure you've heard of in Israel called Machon Puah.
Yep.
And Machon Puah is an incredible place that guide halachically for anything fertility related.
And halakhically, just to be clear, just for all the people
yes,
watching,
please.
halakhically means according to Jewish law, that the guide people according to Jewish law. Okay, continue.
And we feel
Sorry.
very strongly we're going to do everything on the up and up. We don't want any sort of questions later on. And the rabbis there really spend time studying the laws and studying and understanding and trying to figure out how it works. So he said, okay, the rabbi said, with their guidance, a single Jewish woman is our best bet. Let's see what we can do. So I literally went on Google. I Googled surrogacy lawyer because I knew at that point I need to use a lawyer because it's a complicated situation. Surrogacy lawyer in Boca Raton, Florida, where we were living, and 2 names came up. That's it. And I just went with the first one. I wasn't even, I had no idea what would happen. We go to meet with Charlotte. I'll just say her first name, and she was fantastic. And she's like, oh, that's kind of an unusual story. I mean, I've done surrogates, but not this way. Let me advertise.
Meaning specifically because you needed a single Jewish woman. And
yes,
that was the unusual piece.
It's unusual. Now, it was a risky move for us because there was 2 factors. It had to be a woman. For surrogacy in general, you have to have someone who has successfully given birth before. That's a very big piece because you need to know she has a good history. And a single Jewish woman means either she's not married because she never married, or she's divorced would be okay. I have to give a shout out to my sister-in-law who I know is watching, and she offered without even blinking an eye. She went to the doctor without telling me to offer to do it. And unfortunately, because she's married, never mind the fact that she's my sister-in-law, she tried to get permission and she to do it, and that was beyond measure. I mean, it gets me choked up thinking about that, even though it was so many years ago. So she said to us, realistically, like, all right, listen, I'll try my best. I can't make promises. I've dealt with many surrogates, but let's see what happens. So she puts paper ads, ads in the paper, kind of the 2010s or whatever. It was the early 2000s, I should say. And she put those ads for like a good year, and we're not hearing back. So we're starting to think either it's not going to happen, or we have to think of a different route, which is a non-Jewish surrogate, which is not, it is an option. It's not unheard of. In fact, most of the couples I've spoken to over the years have used a non-Jew because it's that difficult to find a Jewish woman. And the reason why it makes a difference is because according to halacha, according to Jewish law, the act of giving birth is what makes the child who they are. So a Jewish woman gives birth to a Jewish child, a non-Jewish woman would be a non-Jewish child, and the ramification of that is conversion. We'd have to convert the baby. And that's okay. And it's, again, been done many times over. So about a year in, we called the rabbi back. We're like, oh, what do we do? He's like, all right, wait a little bit longer. And if it doesn't work, well, I'll reach out to Israel and let's see what we can do. Just as that happened, I get a phone call. This is so funny. I get a phone call from Charlotte. And she said, it's 2 weeks before Pesach, before Passover. And she says, I had a dream. And the dream was about one of my surrogates who just actually gave birth 2 weeks ago to twins for someone else. And in the dream, she told me she was Jewish. I'm going to call her. And she's single. I know that she's single. So first of all, it's funny that she called me first to tell me that instead of calling her first to find out. But fine. Right. She was so excited. We'd waited so long and she was like dying to tell me. So she just called. So I said, okay. And she called, and sure enough, Linda said, yeah, I'm Jewish. Very disconnected, which is a whole other piece of the story I'll explain later. But she said, yeah, I'm Jewish. And yeah, I would do it again. I loved it, which is really unbelievable. She literally had twins 2 weeks before this. So we invite her over, immediately impressed with her strength. I think to me, that's what stood out. She was a horse trainer, and she was like very strong physically and emotionally. Like she's not a deep down emotional, like very stoic, very strong. And I said, are you sure? Like you just had two. She had an older daughter of her own. She's like, I loved every minute of it. So I always laugh also because it was Passover, it was Pesach, and I couldn't feed her anything good. I made like scrambled eggs and French fries. I was so embarrassed, and she could care less. But it was just the funny things that stick in your mind. Anyway, sure enough, we go through all sorts of testing, right? So you have to go through psychological testing, medical testing. Her doctor cleared her. She was already 30, some upper 30s at that point. And her doctor said, you're as strong as a horse, literally. You were cleared to go. And there was a lot of miracles surrounding this because she lived 25 minutes away from us, which in itself is unusual. We happened to sell a house that we owned in New Jersey because we had moved to Florida last minute. And the profit we made literally helped us pay for this. We couldn't have been able to pay. We're both teachers. We didn't have money like that lying around. It's not a cheap endeavor.
Right.
And it was like almost to the penny exact how much we needed for this. And all these things were like messages to us from God, from Hashem, saying, this is meant to be. This was meant to happen. We go through all the various tests, and she's good to go. We get the go-ahead, the clearance. And one just interesting thing, which I feel, and please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, but there was an interesting moment, which I think people might relate to, and that was we had to go through IVF, of course, and the egg retrieval really stands out. I was on medication to produce extra eggs. And I had to go for the egg retrieval, and I woke up, and the first thing that happened is I started crying. Why am I crying? It's an exciting, we're about to go on this adventure. And everyone was so incredibly supportive. I think it worked in our benefit that we were so open. But then it was so final for me. I realized with finality that I was not doing this myself anymore. Like I just had this like, wow, this is really like off my hands at this point. And even though I was so thankful, I was also in such pain. You know, it was so final. And I was,
go ahead.
It's fine. And I was 29. I was such a baby. Like I feel like my life experience had been so rough, and yet I was still so young, and this emotion was overwhelming. But you know, I quickly sort of pulled myself together and said, you are part of an amazing story, and it's worth it, and keep at it. And the honest truth is, I speak to a girls' high school in Florida every year. They do like this senior seminar about, you know, people's life experience. So I share my story, and the person who asked me to do it is the head of the school, is the principal of the school. She's one of my best friends, and every time I talk about it, I say that your principal is one of the reasons I got through this. Having friends who were there for me with no words, by the way, they didn't have to say anything. They were just present. They were right next to me. They were near me. They said, I'm here. They gave me a hug for no reason. They gave me some nice smelling soaps, whatever it was. she was part of the reason I survived this whole story, because it was a lot.
Oh,
If anything, I wish my husband had had more of that. He didn't as much. But that's
right.
a different,
Yes. I
another,
mean, I was right. That's the third
another
podcast that
podcast.
we'll be doing. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
We have a list now. We
we
have a
have a
list.
list.
Okay, I want to go back and ask you a couple of questions before you move
Sure.
on. Can you just speaking about how supportive the people who knew that what you were going through, those people, how they were so amazing to you. Can you talk about, like, you have your daughter Shira, who is like, "Mommy, like, why are we not having any more babies?" Like, and what about all the people in the community? Like, what were people saying? What was your response? How did you feel? Like, can you give us a window into your emotions during that time in the
So it's really,
waiting?
so it's interesting. We were, thank God, surrounded with close friends, but also my husband happened to be the assistant rabbi at the shul at the time, at BRS, and so we were very public figures at that moment. Like, everyone knew who we were because we were working in the synagogue. Um, and I think to some extent I felt this responsibility to sort of be a little bit stoic through it and like cope, because I was setting an example. But at the same time, I remember at one point when I was that third pregnancy, I had to have this IVIG infusion, and I ended up, the dosing was completely wrong, and the nurse came to the house to do it, and the dosing was wrong, and threw me in hospital with meningitis, which was
Oh
just,
gosh.
it was just an extra
Oh,
added layer of
oh
awfulness. But
my
I will
gosh.
say that the 2 days that she was there, she did like 5 hour infusion, which I'm sure you know is like not normal. She was trying to help. It wasn't her fault. But the nurse who came, her name was Natalie, which I don't even know how I remember that. But I was lying on my couch having this IVIG over 2 days, and the door did not stop. It was dinner. It was phone calls. And she said to me, "I am so envious of you." And I'm thinking, why? I'm lying here in this state. She's like, "I wish people in my community, I wish I had a community like yours where they didn't leave me alone and knocked on my door, and the phone calls and the non." She sat there for 5 hours straight. She could see it. Like, it was nonstop. And I think that we're just, the structure of certain communities, I'm not going to be naive and say that every community is good at this, but many communities have infrastructure for these types of things. Now, I think what I most appreciated was the questions that were like about the situation. I didn't appreciate necessarily like the nosy one, like the nosy questions, like understand. I shared when I wanted to share. I felt very strongly about that. And I was very open about everything when I was able to talk about it. Often I wasn't, because it was too emotional. But the friends who really knew me, they seriously just like showed up and just said, "Do you want to hang out? Do you need a hug?" They would text me. Texting is fine. Text me. "Are you okay? I'm here for you." And they knew I wouldn't necessarily respond, because you're not always in the mind frame of that. But the fact that I knew that they were thinking about me was just enough. It was really, really enough, because there was talking of insensitive, people are insensitive and they don't mean to be.
Right.
But the worst, I think the one that sticks in my mind the most, was it was a Jewish holiday at some point in the process. And I was complaining to a neighbor. I was saying, "Oh my gosh, my garbages are so full. It's been 2 days of the holiday. And what am I going to do?" She's like, "Well, what are you talking about? It's not like you have diapers filling the garbage can." And I know she
Of
didn't mean to sound the way it
course.
came off, but I was like dying inside when she said that. That's someone who didn't think about the bigger picture. The friends are the one who think about the bigger picture. They're not asking nosy questions. They're saying, "I'm here when you're ready to talk. If you need to talk to me, talk to me. If you don't, I totally love you anyway, and I'm going to do whatever you need." So it was a mix, right? All the old bubbies want to know everything,
Yep.
but my friends understood I needed space, but they were there for
I
me.
love that.
That's really it.
I love that. I love that. Okay, one other question now, also just going back to the selection of your surrogate. Remind me,
Yeah.
did you share her name? Did I am I
I just,
just
I said her first name, Linda. Yeah, I'm not going to
Linda,
share last
Linda.
name.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was in my head it was Charlotte, but now remembering Charlotte was the
No, that's the
lawyer.
lawyer.
Okay. Linda.
Yeah.
So when you were in discussions with Linda, did
Hmm.
it come up? Was it important to you about, like, what kind of relationship you would have with her during the pregnancy, afterwards? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about that process as you're going to talk about this pregnancy? I know you're about to get into it.
Yes. So interestingly, it's kind of, some of it's done for you, right? We had a 33 or 32-page contract, right? So literally written. It's a very complicated process. We're lucky that in Florida the laws are very helpful, whereas in other states they're not so easy, although I think things have evolved since. I'd like to think that they have. So the technicalities are set up for us. Like, she gets paid each month a certain amount. We pay for maternity clothes. We'll pay for co-pays at the doctor. We were really lucky she had health insurance, and her employer was willing to cover it. Wow. Like, that was in itself a blessing, because that would have been another giant expense. So that piece was done. And truly, like, she's not this, again, she's not like, she's warm, but she's not warm, touchy-feely in that way. So she was very much, whatever you need me to do, I will do for you. So I'll give you an example, which ironically I didn't think of. And just as just a parenthesis, like, again, she was Jewish, but knew next to nothing. Like, she didn't grow up remotely connected. She knew very much that her mother was Jewish, her grandmother was Jewish, and we had proof of that. And that was important, because we had to prove that she was actually Jewish. But she was disconnected, and that's fine. And we actually had them over many times, her and her boyfriend at the time. We had them over many times for Jewish holidays, just because Shabbat, because we felt like, why not? So she called me during the pregnancy at one point early on, and she's like, by the way, do you want me to stop eating pork? Because I'm wondering if that's a good thing that I do that. I'm like, I'm so mortified that I didn't even think of it. I hadn't thought of it. I mean, I knew she wasn't kosher, but it didn't even, I said, you know what? Let me find out. Called the rabbi, and he's like, well, listen, I mean, if she's willing, of course that would be so much better. Right. And so I called her back. She's like, yeah, no problem. So she called me one time. I'm looking at a can of beans with pork pieces. Is that okay? I'm like, no, I'm so sorry. It's the same thing. She's like, no problem. Like, she didn't have a hesitation at any point. She's really an amazing human.
Unbelievable.
And I'll tell you about her. We saw her recently, so I'll tell you about that at the end. Yeah. But so she, you know, we basically, she was very matter of fact, and she often would calm me down as opposed to the other one. She had a subchorionic bleed in the like 3 months in, and I was, again, freaking out. I was in school teaching, and my assistant teacher's like, go take care of yourself, because I was a mess. And it was Linda who was like, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. I got this. I've had this before. I'm going to go on bed rest. I'm fine. Like, she was just beyond. And I also acknowledge that not everyone has such a smooth, amazing relationship or experience. It's not, we were beyond lucky, beyond. Anyway, so it's just, it was kind of the unspoken, like she understood that there's a little bit of a barrier, but she shared everything with us. I went to every single appointment. Like, that was not a hesitation, of course. Like, she shared every little tiny update, because she knew that was important to us to know what was going on. So you have to say it out loud, I think, at first.
I mean, so, okay, so, like, now let's go, like, now we sort of did the meta. Now back to sort of the details. So you did this egg retrieval. You woke up crying.
Yeah.
And then you transferred, you got a hold of her, you transferred, and she got pregnant immediately. Like give us so, that, like.
Well, his also, the Jewish world is very small, and it happens to be, we were just in Florida in the winter, and I'm standing in shul, and I look over and I see the embryologist who made my twins, right? 16 years later. And I sort of elbow my oldest Shira, and I'm like, you see that guy over there? He made your siblings. I didn't say that to my twins, because I think they would have been weirded out by that. But he was a member of the synagogue by chance. We didn't pick him on purpose. It just happened. And he literally let us watch. Like, we looked at these embryos in the Petri dish. There's some rules and regulations, and now it's even more stringent about, you have someone guarding the embryos, because you don't want, God forbid, any mistakes or mixes. And he was beyond measure. Like, he was really, like, helped us with that. Machon Pua, this organization in Israel, helps to bring someone in to watch the embryos. We did the transfer. Typically, they say you transfer 2 embryos. I think we had 3. I think we did 2, because hopefully 1 will take. And if 2 takes, it's a bonus, but chances are it'll just be 1. And we, again, another miracle, like, it's just miracle after miracle, both took, which also, as an aside, that cracks me up when people ask me if they're identical twins. I'm like, they're a boy and girl besides anything else, but fine. Okay. There were 2 embryos, very clearly. And we, and
by the way, you know this, and many people out there also know this. I also have boy-girl twins, and I also get asked that question all the time. So yes,
it cracks me up. It's really well-meaning. It's just so funny.
Totally.
It's so fun. They're okay. If we looked at chromosomes, anyway, genetic makeup is definitely a big factor in how they're different. So we, thank God. I mean, it was very smooth. She had the transfer. She did a positive. She got a positive. I don't remember how many weeks later. We found out that it was twins. It was actually the portion of the week. The parsha that week was Toldot, which is about twins.
Wow.
That's the same week we found out we were having twins. And then we decided also that we were going to find out the genders because the whole thing was so out of whack, unusual. We didn't with my oldest. In fact, we were convinced we're having a boy, and obviously we're a little surprised. But we just felt this is so unusual one way or another. I kind of needed to be mentally prepared for what was happening. And we found out that it was a boy and a girl. And again, she had I was schlepping down to Pembroke Pines, which is like it's a drive every time to go to the appointments, but we wanted to be there for every ultrasound and for every checkup and she was so chill about it. She did not have any qualms of, like, I did most of the in-between visits. Erin came to the big ones. And she just carried this thing like it was no big deal. She, was uncomfortable. Twins are a lot after having just had twins 6 months before.
I know, that's all I kept thinking about. I didn't know that part of the story. I'm like, I can't believe this woman. It's
And we
unreal.
weren't the end of the story. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But so she carries, thank God. And then actually it was like the timing also, like it was the end of school. Everything in my life runs around the school calendar, as every teacher will relate. And we were finishing June 13th, but June 12th, she calls and she's like, I think this is it. And it was 35 weeks, I think, which is, I think, fairly normal for twins.
Yeah.
We go to the hospital. Long and the short of it was a false alarm. So go back home. The next morning, I'm driving some people to the airport just to be nice. And I get a phone call. She's like, all right, this time is for real. And the date was 6/13, which is in Jewish connections, the number of the commandments in the Torah. My kids love that their birthday is 6/13, and a lot of people remember it. I have friends who text me once in a while at 6:13 p.m. at night, saying 6/13.
Oh,
yes,
cute.
I have some amazing friends, thank God. And so even the birth, and this is, I think, important to share because the birth is complicated. We knew she was having a C-section, but the question was, could we be in the room? So at first I was told I could come into the room because of space issues, right? When it's a C-section, there's a lot of manpower going on there, right? They're going to have a separate thing for each baby and extra doctors and whatever it was. And my husband, honestly, is a squeamish guy. So I don't think I don't think he was disappointed. He was not going to watch anything. He would pass out in a heartbeat because he can't handle the sight of blood. So, but in the last minute, they're like, oh, fine, we'll squeeze you in. This is too important. Come. So we dress up. He kind of hides in a corner because he really doesn't want to pass out. And I am standing, they have the big sheet, and I'm standing next to Linda's head, kind of reassuring her, which in itself is an out-of-body experience because I'm not the one giving birth, but it's my kids. Right. I was very worried about that piece, and we could talk about that a little bit, about the feelings and all that piece. But I'm looking over the sheet and I'm snapping 1,000 pictures as my babies are coming out of her. I mean, it's kind of gory, but amazing at the same time. And then the minute they're out, they're in their little, trolleys, whatever you call them, and we're with them. Like they're closing her up to, taking care of her, and we are with them. Some of the complications were she obviously and rightfully was in the mom's bed recovering, right, in the hospital bed. Yeah. Where do I go? What do I do? I want to stay there for the time that the babies are there. Okay. And these are things I hadn't even thought about till I arrived in the hospital. Wow. And they said, oh, no worries. We thought about this, to their credit. We're going to put you in an on-call room, a doctor's on-call room. Okay. So I got a room with a bed and a thing, and I set my alarm every 3 hours, and I went to the nursery and I fed them every 3 hours. My doctor actually encouraged me to try and stimulate milk for nursing purposes, which I tried. It didn't work, and that's okay. It actually was meant to be, because I think I would have been way more drained in that way. And Linda at some point said, is it okay if I come see the babies? I'm like, oh my God, you joke? Of course. It wasn't even a hesitation. Of course. And we have a picture of her with the two of them. She was so proud, and so everything about it was just such a big deal for her, to the point that she asked us if she could speak at my son's breasts at the circumcision. She wanted to speak. And this was a room filled with like 400 people, because again, we were assistant rabbi. Right. So people and rabbis, and they knew us. And there was not a pin drop, as you can imagine. And honestly, all she kept saying was, I'm the lucky one. I'm so privileged. I got to do this for you. I feel like this was changed my life. It's something. And the whole time I'm thinking, are you crazy?
Ah,
You changed our life beyond measure, and you're thinking us? It wasn't normal. It wasn't normal. And then my husband really sealed the deal when he wrote a letter to the babies. That was his speech. Dear Rena and Simcha, let me tell you all the people that were involved in you coming into the world. And
oh my
he
gosh.
said this letter, and it was a major tearjerker. It was a lot. But he's a good speaker, so it was amazing. And it wasn't, not once did I worry about attachment. She made it so easy and so clear that she was just feeling grateful for doing this for us. And in fact, she came over a few months later to visit. And this was kind of sealed it for me, where she asked me to hold Rena, and she sort of held it in kind of like an awkward way. Her daughter was already 12, I think it had been a long time, and she kind of didn't know what to do with her. I'm like, okay, fine. There's no attachment here. Like, she's just, how do I hold this thing? It was funny. So that, for whatever reason, psychologically made me feel a little bit better, even though I really had no concern.
Right.
She wears a necklace with all the babies that she's carried, 5 of them, surrogate babies, with their names.
5.
She has one of those like little people
Yeah,
necklaces
yeah,
that she
yeah,
wears,
yeah, yeah.
and she wears it all every day of her life because she's so proud of this. Like, to her, it's such a big deal. Yeah, she's something else.
I, I'm almost just like dumbfounded. Like I don't even know what to say, because it is, I mean, it is clear with everything that you've been through and the story of from the beginning to the end. Like, you know, we don't know why things happen, right? We don't understand them. We are never going to understand them until we get up to Shemayim, we get up to heaven, and we have a chance, we have an opportunity to ask.
Right.
But it is clear that in your story, you are your children were meant to be here,
Yeah.
and in this way, to
Yeah.
with all of the intricate pieces. I just love, I mean, there are people over and over who are just keep commenting here, commenting, and just, yes. um okay, talk to us, looking back. When did you get up the gumption to share the intricacies? I mean, because this is, yeah, by the way, someone just said we need a podcast with Linda. Okay. Elisheva.
Yeah. She doesn't do social media, but I bet you she would do it, because I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure. I have to ask her. It's an
Okay.
interesting question.
All right. You and I are going to talk about this afterwards.
Yes.
The person who said this, absolutely. Yes, we are absolutely going to
I
have a
have to
podcast with
this.
Linda.
I'm so curious what she'd say.
Um,
Um,
can you share, like, what was the moment when you decided, okay, like, yes, people knew, and the people in your community knew, your friends knew, but having more of this mission, you said it was about 6 years ago when you started to open up. What was the thing that changed for you that made you want to start speaking?
Well, it's so we've always spoken about it. I'll be honest. I never had any sort of therapy for what I went through. I never went to a therapist. I never got that kind of help. In fact, I had moments after my third loss that it was a very low time in my life. I had to go on anxiety medication, panic attack, like, and I didn't really get the treatment I should have. Probably, I just held it together. In fact, I remember after the first loss, my baby was 2, right? So I was on a mission. I went to my parents' house, and I'm going to take care of Shira. I held it together and held it together and I think 24 hours later, I had a complete meltdown because I thought I could. I thought I could hold it together. Anyway, so to be honest, like, it took me up until about 6 years ago because I couldn't say the story without crying, and I don't know why I struggled with that. I didn't want to distract the story with crying. You know what I'm saying? And it's very hard to talk about painful memories. It's still, different things trigger me at different points, things I say or things I remember but I also, after I've shared, I feel so much better. So I started very small. I shared on very much individual basis. I especially when I noticed, like, I had a hunch that someone was maybe going through stuff.
Right.
So I'd say, have I ever mentioned my story to you? And then I go into it, and inevitably they'd be like, oh my God, I'm going through this struggle, and I'm so glad you said that, because let me share my issues. And so I had to do it in small pieces. That talk that we did together was the biggest crowd, but the saving grace of that, I think there were like 300 people on that podcast, but the saving grace was it was on a screen, so I could handle that. I get very, like, stressed out from public speaking, even though I'm a teacher, and I can't, it makes me very anxious. So that was the savior of that. So it really was that simple. I needed to be able to talk about it without losing it, because then you can't get your story out. And then I feel like it was a waste of everyone's time. And it's okay to cry about things, and it's okay. But I feel like that's almost like the personal piece of your story. Cry about it with yourself and your family and your friends. But publicly, we legitimately made a decision. We could have kept the whole thing completely hush hush. And I know families who've done that, and I respect it and I understand it. We made a specific decision to be public. I really, especially 15 years ago, I'll tell you this one quick thing that stands out. I never forgot this. And I won't mention the organization. I don't like to whatever. But I called an organization when we first started looking in the very beginnings of it, like way before Rena and Simply came about. And I said, I'm looking for guidance on finding a rabbi who understands this, who I could talk to, because this is brand new.
Yep.
And the response I got was, I can't imagine any rabbi would allow such a thing.
Uh,
It was the most judgmental response I ever got. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
uh,
I was so thrown off by this. The judgment and it was awful. And I have such a, every time I see this, a very well-known organization, and every time I see their advertising, it gives me like a dagger in my heart, because I wonder if they're onto a change now, all these years later. I'm always curious. Anyway, so that also gave me even more reason to be public about it, because I'm like, it's okay, it can be done. There's people who are struggling so much, and they think that all hope is lost, and it's not. We never in a million years thought about this at 19 and 21 when we got married, obviously. And even when I had my first kid, I never imagined going through such a journey. But once we decided this was a thing and that we were going to sort of, lead the way with it, it was like, oh my gosh, we were meant to do this. It was so obvious that this was the right thing. And I'm not going to minimize and say it was easy. It wasn't. And it was still that crying I did after the retrieval. It was a lot of pain. But the therapy for me is sharing. Honestly, that's really the bottom line. That was a very long way of getting to that point, but that's the point. It helps me.
and I mean, that's, half of the reason, if not all of the reason, why I was supposed to have a baby exists. It's,
Yeah.
we have to talk about the hard things,
Yeah.
because when we talk about the hard things, okay, yes, it's selfish. It makes us feel better. But we know that there are so many people out there that are also struggling, and we want to help them feel a little bit less alone. And the only way we can do that is to just actually tell the stories. Like, and I think for so many of us, and you and I have had different stories, we've had similarities, but we've had differences. But in those moments, right, when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and we're crying and it's like awful, 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 you're like, there is nobody. I know I used to think this all the time. There can't be a single person on the face of this planet who really understands me.
Right.
And the reality is, there are.
Yeah.
There are. And
I'll tell
that's
you
why
some.
we do this.
So a couple of crazy stories, because it just, every time these things happen, it reassures me that I was doing the right thing. So this is also just interesting. We had a debate when to tell our children about the journey of
Yeah,
getting to
that
them.
was one of my next questions. So perfect.
Right. So we pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off. We lived in Houston, in between Florida and here in Maryland. And honestly, we got to Houston and people didn't know our story. And for whatever reason, I chose not to really share much. We were very involved in the school that we were working at, and that was our life, was school. And I didn't really have an opportunity to share. But it was about to be their 11th birthday. And for my children's birthday still, we always do breakfast. No matter what day of the week it is, we do an early morning breakfast, even if it's 5 o'clock in the morning, to celebrate the birthday. We've been doing this for years. So it was their birthday breakfast. And I said to my husband, like, Imlo Achshav Eimatai, if not now, when? We have to tell them. They're old enough. Someone's going to tell them otherwise. And so I'm, of course, in my mind, my son is like a bit of a brainiac. So I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, what questions is he going to ask? I'm just bracing myself, because there's 1,000 questions he could ask. And I'm like, all right, let's see how this goes. I weave this whole fairy tale story. I make it sound like a princess story, really, like it was this magical, da, da, da. And I said, and this is how you came to be ours, and whatever. And I'm holding my holding my breath, waiting. And my son says, I have one question. And I'm like sweating bullets at this point. And he's like, why did you wait so long to tell us? That's all he wanted to know. I'm like, that is a valid question. I don't really know. I'm sorry I waited. And then my daughter thinks about it and she's like, oh, that's why we know Linda. She couldn't understand why this woman was in our lives, not related to us. And like, we stayed connected. So anyway, but to the actual story. So I invited Linda to Rena's bat mitzvah, and she said she wanted to come. And it was the first time my kids were meeting her in a very different light, in a different context.
Yeah.
They hadn't seen her as a surrogate; they'd seen her as a
Yeah.
friend. Friday, Erev Shabbat, of the bat mitzvah, we have a photographer coming to the house to take pictures of the family, and Linda's in the pictures. And through, I think, context of conversation, the photographer realized who this woman was. For what she realized that she didn't quite fit, but what the story. So we're rushing because Shabbat's about to start, and she's about to leave the door, this photographer, and she said, I think we were meant to meet. I said, what do you mean? She said, I had cancer as a single woman.
Wait, hold on. You're talking about the photographer now.
I'm sorry, the photographer,
Okay.
yes. She said, I had whatever cancer, I had to have a full hysterectomy, and I always knew that I would have to have children via surrogate. And I was meant to meet you. My husband and I are now starting the journey, and we know nothing. Can we meet with you in a couple of months and talk about it? I'm like, of course. And it was just by chance. I didn't, and thank God they had a baby with a surrogate, and it all went well. Wow. A bunch of years later. But it's all these small things that remind me why it's worth talking about it. And it's also, and by the way, the losses are also I use to help people. Like I had a cousin whose wife went through a stillborn, and I was able to talk her through not only what to expect in the birth, but what to do afterwards. Like just for my husband and I, the first time we went through this, and I was in college still. I mean, I was really a baby, and we'd been in Israel. No one knew I'd been pregnant, so it was like a whole. We took on 2,000 piece puzzle making. Like we bought a puzzle, and that was our therapy. We sat there quietly and we just did a puzzle. And so when this cousin went through this issue, through this event, I sent them a puzzle and I said, I don't know if this will work for you, but for us, it was mindless distraction that didn't make us feel guilty for being distracted. And you use these opportunities to help other people cope in the way that you can cope. I just need to take a drink. Too much talking.
1,000%.
Sorry.
No, please take a drink. Take a drink. Can I also ask, was that also the time that you told your older daughter, or like your older daughter had to have known something beforehand because she was how old when the twins were born?
So she knew. She was 8, and she was in 2nd grade, and we felt she was old enough. She was very smart, and she's the oldest in type A, and so we were very upfront with her from the beginning, and she didn't read much into it or ask us questions about the process really. But she knew who Linda was. She was actually friendly with Linda's daughter because she would come with her to visit. And she was honestly, ironically, she was thrilled to have siblings. And now they're like the best friends you could have, bestest of friends. Thank God, actually, COVID really helped that because we were all stuck in the house together for so long. But, come, 2-3 weeks into having twins in the house, she was like, hi guys, I still exist. Like she felt very neglected and forgotten about for a long time. And it was actually a massive shift of like, whoa, okay, we need to give this child attention.
Right.
But we didn't, it happens to be my daughter Rena has type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed at 9. And our approach to that with her, I'm also type 1, later diagnosed, and the approach was life goes on. We have to, it's not fun, it's not easy, but we have to live our life in a regular way. So when you're very low, your sugar's very low, your sugar's very high, we're not calling the emergency line, we're just dealing with it, we're just handling it. And I think we did a lot of that with Shira with the twins. Like this was an unusual way to get you siblings, but Baruch Hashem, we have siblings, and you have a brother and a sister. I mean, honestly, when we found out it was a boy and a girl, I'm like, Hashem, I just don't understand. It's like a package deal. Really, not that, I mean, would have been fine with 2 boys or 2 girls, but it just worked out. And so she was so excited by that notion that she didn't care how they came. She didn't care where they came from. She's like, I have babies, I have siblings. That's all I care about.
Amazing.
So yeah, she actually took it much better than I expected. And I'll be honest, and I've said this to women, a lot of women who have thought of the process. I don't think about, the surrogate. Interestingly, in Hebrew, surrogacy is a surrogate is called an em pundakait, and a pundak in Hebrew means an inn. Why? She's a hotel for 9 months, 10 months, let's say ish. 9 months, she's carrying these babies. She's a hotel room. And then those babies are absolutely your responsibility. So when you put context of like 9 months versus a whole lifetime, you don't think about that so much. I mean, it doesn't change my level of gratitude, and it doesn't change my gratitude to Linda or to Hashem, to God, right? I feel the same level all the time. I look at my kids who are taller than me now, and I'm like, it's not even like it's just amazing. I don't know, but you have to. I just lost my train of thought. I totally just lost my train of thought. I don't remember what I was saying, but anyway, you get the point.
Yes, just about the gratitude that you have to
Yeah,
have for everything and every piece of
right.
the
And you
process.
forget, right? I'm sorry, and you forget that it's 9 months so far along ago. People are so worried. Am I going to think about it? Am I going to feel different? Honestly, I was just as exhausted. I was feeding them all hours of the night, and I, you know, I still had to deal with tantrums and terrible twos, and but maybe I had like a slight greater appreciation for it because I knew I didn't take for granted that I had them. But nothing was different about raising them. It's just the first 9 months was not my job; it was someone else's. The rest was mine, and I really rarely think about the actual piece of the pregnancy, like that part. I think about the process, I think about the picture, I think
Yeah.
about the results, and I think that's important for people to know that, like, don't worry about that. Honestly, like, it's minutia in the process.
I love that. And it's such great advice because look, we spend so much time right here talking about the like the getting to the point of getting pregnant and then staying pregnant and
Mhm.
then God willing having a healthy baby. But once that happens, you go off and lead the rest of your
Yeah,
life. Do you carry this this piece with you forever? Of course, you will never forget Linda. You will never forget any of the babies that you lost.
right.
You will never forget the process and the all of the emotions and the tumultuous times that you went through to get there, nor will I. But
Right.
you're 1,000% right that while that's always a piece of us, it's we now look forward
Right.
and we carry it with us, but we look
And look
forward.
what you've done with
I,
your losses. I'm saying
I,
you, but
okay.
I'm saying the point is it's turning something painful into something that other people can cope with their stuff with. You know what I'm saying? It's very easy, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't wallow in feeling sorry for myself at different points, of course, and that's natural. But ultimately, I really, you know, we're so stuck in this world of like secrecy, or we don't want to share our dirty laundry because we worry so much about what other people will think. And honestly, it's been so good for me personally, mentally, to share. I mean, I'm a schmoozer at the best of times, but I really feel like it just gave me the outlet I needed to cope through it. It really did.
Incredible. Incredible.
Um,
Okay, so to just wrap things up here,
sure.
if I were to ask your husband and you together, but here I'm asking you to sort of pull him in here. Obviously he's not here, but to
Right.
pull his voice a little bit in here. What would he say about the process, and what advice would both of you give, both to the men and to the women,
Mm.
or to whomever is going through this process, thinking about going through this process? What advice would you give to them?
So interestingly, and probably obviously, you know, I think that the guys usually get forgotten, not completely, and the joy that people felt was for both of us equally. When I was going through losses, he felt so helpless and he couldn't take any of the pain, and at the same time was in his own pain. And people gave me tons of attention and the hugs and a lot less to him. And that, I think, he would say is number one. Like the husbands are suffering just as much, or the partner, the spouse, whatever it is, you know, suffering just as much, just as deeply. And if anything, it's a teeny bit worse because you're watching the one you love deeply go through this terrible time. So that's the first thing: is don't forget the man, the husband, the partner. Um, and in terms of the process, honestly, we're blessed. For some people, these kind of procedures tear them apart because it's so emotionally draining. For us, it did the opposite. It brought us closer together. And I think partially because we communicated, we spoke about our feelings, we didn't hide our feelings. It was okay and to cry together. It was okay to be angry together, to say, God, why me, together, um, and to accept that we each kind of grieved or took it in different ways. The surrogacy, I think, felt so suddenly hopeful for us that it just energized us. It gave us this sort of like new energy. We're like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. It's we can actually do this.
Right.
And then the joy that people had, because we were so public, there was so much joy surrounding Rina and Simcha's birth and arrival, and that just kind of made us feel, I can't even describe, elated beyond, I mean, that's not even a good enough word. It was just, you know, so, and then we went through raising them together. We both were sleep deprived, and we both dealt with the terrible twos. And we, I think it's just about communication. Honestly, I think it's really doing a check-in. Like, are you okay? Are you okay? You know, what, are you exhausted? Are you? I mean, my husband one time accidentally fed Simcha 2 bottles instead of doing one for Rina, one for Simcha. We were so tired. Yeah. Like, what does he know? He's distracted. Yeah. Like this. But we laugh about those things. I think also being able to laugh about the silly things, even with all the pain and all the trouble and the amount of challenges to get to that point, we still have to find those little moments of laughter and celebration. And the funny thing is that I wanted to name Simcha Azariah, because Azariah means Hashem helped. And my husband no offense to anyone here, did not like that name at all. And on the car ride to the hospital, he's like, I have an idea. I have a name idea. And he's like, what do you think about Simcha? And I'm like, wow, I would never have thought of that. It's like so obvious. Right. Happiness. Why? Of course, this is a big deal. So we compromised. And the fact that he got to make that choice, I loved, because it was part of the process of coming up with the right name. And we did Elazar, which was a different version of Azariah for his middle name. Okay. Still means Hashem helped, God helped. Right. It wasn't Azariah. And so again, communicating. But as an outsider, as a friend, if you know someone, just back to the lost piece of things, if you see a husband and wife going through this, we had someone in our community a few years ago who went through this. I got Aaron on that phone. I got Aaron on a phone to the husband, and he was very happy to talk to the husband and give his, you know, comfort.
One second.
No worries, no worries.
Welcome to real life, everybody. Welcome to real life.
I love it. It's great.
Elisheva, thank you so much. I am so grateful to you. I know that I every time, now this is like, I think the second or third time that I've heard you tell your story. I'm just always blown away. And all the people here have said over and over again, they're still hearing pieces of it that you haven't shared already. Thank you. Can people, I'm guessing I know the answer is yes, but I need to ask it anyway. Can people reach out to you if they want to talk to you?
Of course. And if anyone out there my dream was always to open like some sort of surrogacy agency to help people find surrogates. It's not easy. And it's certainly, if you're going through the single Jewish woman route, it's even less easy. And Linda, God bless her, carried one more time after us. Wow. And had a single baby for a couple who had been trying for like 20 years to have a baby.
Wow.
And that was she was already in her 40s at that point, and that was really it. But so if anyone is in that work, I definitely encourage you. I wish I had the time for such a thing. I'm doing other crazy kind of work in Jewish education, but this, just don't be judgmental. Don't judge people's stories. There's always more to it. And I think that with every situation, like we can't judge decisions, and human nature is to be judgmental. But I think that there's so much going on, and we need to understand that and accept it. And when people want to share their story, hopefully they will, just show them that you're there for them. You know, be present. Say, I'm here when you're ready. I know something's going on. You don't have to tell me, but tell me when you want, when it's good for you.
Yes. Yes. I'm shouting that from the rooftops. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Elisheva, so much.
Really, my pleasure.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night.